2 Kings, chapter 9. And Elisha the prophet has called to one of the sons of the prophets, and says to him, Gird up your loins, and take this vial of oil in your hand, and go to Ramoth-Gilead. And you have gone in there, and see Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi there. And you have gone in, and caused him to rise out of the midst of his brothers, and brought him into the inner part of an inner chamber, and taken the vial of oil, and poured it on his head, and said, Thus said YHWH, I have anointed you for king to Israel. And you have opened the door and fled, and do not wait. And the young man goes, the young man the prophet, to Ramoth-Gilead, and comes in, and behold, chiefs of the force are sitting. And he says, I have a word for you, O chief. And Jehu says, To which of all of us? And he says, To you, O chief. And he rises and comes into the house, and he pours the oil on his head, and says to him, Thus said YHWH, God of Israel, I have anointed you for king to the people of YHWH, to Israel. And you have struck the house of your lord Ahab, and I have required the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of YHWH, from the hand of Jezebel. And all the house of Ahab has perished, and I have cut off from Ahab those sitting on the wall, and restrained, and left in Israel. And I have given up the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and as the house of Baasha, son of Ahijah. And dogs eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there is none burying. And he opens the door and flees. And Jehu has gone out to the servants of his lord, and one says to him, Is there peace? Why did this madman come to you? And he says to them, You have known the man and his talk. And they say, False, declare to us now. And he says, He spoke thus and thus to me, saying, Thus said YHWH, I have anointed you for king to Israel. And they hurry, each one, and take his garment, and put it under him at the top of the stairs, and blow with a horn, and say, Jehu has reigned. And Jehu, son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi, conspires against Joram. And Joram was keeping in Ramoth-Gilead, he and all Israel, from the presence of Hazael, king of Aram. And King Joram turns back to be healed in Jezreel of the wounds with which the Arameans strike him in his fighting with Hazael, king of Aram. And Jehu says, If it is your mind, do not let an escaped one go out from the city, to go to declare it in Jezreel. And Jehu rides and goes to Jezreel, for Joram is lying there, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, has gone down to see Joram. And the watchman is standing on the tower in Jezreel, and sees the company of Jehu in his coming, and says, I see a company. And Joram says, Take a rider, and send to meet them, and let him say, Is there peace? And the rider on the horse goes to meet him, and says, Thus said the king, Is there peace? And Jehu says, And what is peace to you? Turn around behind me. And the watchman declares, saying, The messenger came to them, and he has not returned. And he sends a second rider on a horse, and he comes to them and says, Thus said the king, Is there peace? And Jehu says, And what is peace to you? Turn around behind me. And the watchman declares, saying, He came to them, and he has not returned. And the driving is like the driving of Jehu, son of Nimshi, for he drives with madness. And Jehoram says, Harness. And his chariot is harnessed, and Jehoram, king of Israel, goes out, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, each in his chariot. And they go out to meet Jehu, and find him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. And it comes to pass, at Jehoram's seeing Jehu, that he says, Is there peace, Jehu? And he says, What is the peace, while the whoredoms of your mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are many? And Jehoram turns his hands and flees, and says to Ahaziah, Deceit, O Ahaziah! And Jehu has filled his hand with a bow, and strikes Jehoram between his arms, and the arrow goes out from his heart, and he bows down in his chariot. And Jehu says to his captain Bidkar, Lift up, cast him into the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite. For remember, you and I were riding together after his father Ahab, and Yahweh lifted this burden on him. Have I not seen the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons last night? A declaration of Yahweh. Indeed, I have repaid to you in this portion. A declaration of Yahweh. And now lift up, cast him into the portion according to the word of Yahweh. And Ahaziah king of Judah has seen, and flees the way of the garden house. And Jehu pursues after him and says, Strike him, also him, in the chariot, in the going up to Gird, that is, Ibleam. And he flees to Megiddo and dies there. And his servants carry him to Jerusalem in a chariot, and bury him in his burying place with his fathers in the city of David. And in the 11th year of Joram, son of Ahab, Ahaziah reigned over Judah. And Jehu comes to Jezreel, and Jezebel has heard, and puts her eyes in paint, and beautifies her head, and looks out through the window. And Jehu has come into the gate, and she says, Was there peace for Zimri, slayer of his Lord? And he lifts up his face to the window and says, Who is with me? Who? And 2 or 3 eunuchs look out to him, and he says, Let her go. And they let her go, and some of her blood is sprinkled on the wall and on the horses, and he treads her down. And he comes in and eats and drinks and says, Now look after this cursed one and bury her, for she is a king's daughter. And they go to bury her, and have not found anything of her except the skull and the feet and the palms of the hands. And they turn back and declare it to him, and he says, It is the word of Yahweh that he spoke by the hand of his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, In the portion of Jezreel the dogs eat the flesh of Jezebel. And the carcass of Jezebel has been as dung on the face of the field in the portion of Jezreel, that they do not say, This is Jezebel.